They didn't let me in that night. I remember the air. Cold, sharp, the kind that bites through satin and self-respect at the same time. I was 21, standing outside the glass doors of the Preston Hotel ballroom, holding a tiny silver clutch and my breath. My dress wasn't designer, my heels weren't new, and my aunt's words still echoed like an alarm. This event is for guests, not family. I watched from the curb as the valet opened door after door, ushering in women with perfect hair and perfect laughter. I could see the chandelier through the glass, light spilling like liquid gold, laughter like wind chimes. My aunt, Evelyn, floated inside in a silver gown, smiling the kind of smile that meant, "You're not one of us." When I tried to step forward, the security guard stopped me. "Sorry, miss. Guests only," and I wasn't one. The embarrassment hit harder than the cold. I had spent the week convincing myself she'd come around, that she'd see me as part of the family, not as the quiet niece who grew up on the wrong side of their expectations. But she didn't. Evelyn had always loved having family who looked like success, not family who was still building it. So I stood there until my fingers went numb, pretending I was waiting for someone. Then I turned around, heels sinking slightly into the slush of late winter, and whispered to myself, one day, they'll open that door for me. That was the night I promised myself I'd never again wait outside something I was capable of creating on my own. Back then, I didn't have much. Just a half-finished degree, a job at a marketing firm that barely noticed me, and a name nobody recognized. But what I did have was time, and I used every hour of it like currency. I stayed late at work, learned design software from YouTube tutorials, and built portfolios nobody asked for. By day, I was invisible. By night, I was building something real. Every rejection, every ignored idea became part of my private archive, proof that I wasn't done yet. Evelyn, meanwhile, climbed higher. Her charity galas became the talk of the city, glittering, loud, full of names that made small-town papers gasp. I'd see her photo in society columns, pearls shining, her hand resting lightly on a senator's arm. Underneath every caption, the same tagline appeared. Sponsored by the Preston Foundation, chaired by Evelyn Carter. It stung. Not the fame, but the way she had rewritten our family's story to exclude me entirely. When people asked, "Isn't that your aunt?" I'd just smile and say, "Yes, but we move in different circles." The truth was simpler. She moved in circles that didn't have room for anyone who reminded her of her beginnings. But circles can change shape. 5 years later, the same marketing firm that once ignored my proposals promoted me to creative director. My campaign started winning awards. I built my own consulting agency and partnered with luxury brands, the kind that used to sponsor Evelyn's galas. It didn't happen overnight. It happened one quiet, determined morning after another. By the time I turned 28, I was running 3 major accounts, managing a team of designers, and signing contracts under my own name. My company had finally become known for something Evelyn's couldn't buy: authenticity. Then one afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line, sponsorship inquiry, Preston Women's Empowerment Gala. I froze. The logo at the bottom of the email was hers, Evelyn's. They wanted me to consider being one of their new headline sponsors. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, remembering the sound of that ballroom door closing years ago. I could still feel the sting in my chest, the weight of that rejection pressing down like frost. And then, slowly, a smile spread across my face. It wasn't revenge that I felt. It was recognition, a soft, stunning realization that I was no longer the one asking to be invited. This time they were knocking on my door. When I clicked open that email, my hands didn't shake. They floated. It was like time itself slowed down, letting me absorb the irony. The message was short, polite, and beautifully unaware. Dear Ms. Harper, we are seeking a new lead sponsor for our annual Preston Women's Empowerment Gala. Your firm's recent campaigns align perfectly with our mission of celebrating resilience and reinvention. We would be honored to feature your brand as our presenting partner." At the bottom was the signature, Evelyn Carter, Chairwoman. I reread it 3 times, not because I couldn't believe it, but because I wanted to. It felt like the universe had taken the script of my humiliation and written me into the credits. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I closed my laptop and took a walk around the city, the same streets I used to rush through in the rain, clutching resumes in cheap folders. Everything looked different now. The air didn't sting. It shimmered. I passed the Preston Hotel, still there, still polished. For a moment, I just stood across the street and watched a new set of guests arrive, stepping out of black cars and into light. The same doorman was there, older, slower, holding that same door open. I wondered if he'd remember me. Probably not. But I remembered everything. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine and drafted my reply. "Dear Mrs. Carter, I appreciate your invitation. My firm would love to discuss potential sponsorship options. Please let me know when you're available for a call." I didn't sign it Lena Harper. Not yet. I used my company's name instead, Harper & Cupboard Creative Studio. It wasn't deception. It was artful distance. I wanted her to meet what I'd built, before remembering who I was. 2 days later, her assistant scheduled a virtual meeting. When the screen came to life, I was greeted by 3 faces, Evelyn's among them. Her hair was lighter, styled perfectly as always, and her smile practiced. "She didn't recognize me at first. Ms. Harper," she began, reading from a script. "We've been so impressed by your firm's storytelling work. Your campaign for the Morey Foundation was breathtaking." "Thank you," I said softly, my voice steady. "That campaign was personal to me." She nodded absently, scrolling through a file. "We'd love for Harper & Co. to join us as our presenting sponsor. It's a very exclusive position. We don't offer it lightly." I could have told her she'd once refused to offer me something far lighter, a simple invitation. But I didn't. I watched her talk, watched her pride blur into habit. Her tone was polished, but her eyes were elsewhere, until mine caught hers. That's when I saw it. A flicker. She froze for a heartbeat, her lips parting slightly. "Wait," she whispered. "Lena?" I smiled. "Hello, Aunt Evelyn." For a long, thin silence, the meeting stopped breathing. Her assistants exchanged confused looks. Then she let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Oh my goodness. It's been years. I hardly recognized you." "I get that a lot," I said. "Time changes people." Her expression was a blend of pride, discomfort, and calculation. The kind of smile that tried to make history vanish through charm. "You look so successful. I've heard of your firm, actually." I leaned back, letting the silence stretch before answering. "We've been fortunate. We specialize in transformation stories, turning rejection into recognition." She blinked. Just once, then looked down, her voice smaller. "Well, that's wonderful. I suppose this gala will be the perfect fit then." When the meeting ended, I closed my laptop and sat there in the quiet glow of my office, heart steady. I didn't need to gloat or remind her of the door she closed. Life had already handled that for me. Over the next few weeks, my team worked closely with hers. Every press release, every banner, every printed ticket had one thing in common: my company's name at the top, in bold letters, presented by Harper & Cobra Creative Studio, and below it, in smaller font, hosted by the Preston Foundation, Chairwoman Evelyn Carter. The hierarchy had changed, subtly, but unmistakably. I didn't skip a single meeting. I watched as my aunt tried to maintain her composure, her words carefully chosen, her tone almost too polite. I knew she was proud, in a way, proud of me now that the world approved of me. But there was something else in her eyes, too: regret. One afternoon, as we reviewed the final print proofs, she said, "You know, Lena, I'm glad you stayed in touch with the family after all this time." I looked up from the proofs. "I didn't," I said softly. You reached out to me. The silence that followed was sharp, but clean. The kind that doesn't wound, only defines the edges of truth. When I left that meeting, the winter air outside felt softer. I wasn't 21 anymore, standing in the cold waiting for permission. I was 30, walking out of the same world that once locked me out, and now had my name shining above its entrance. And the best part? The gala hadn't even begun yet. The night of the gala. Tone. Cinematic, slow burn, poetic justice. The emotion shifts from nostalgia to power, but quiet. Graceful power. Length about 1,500 words. Continuous paragraph narrative. No headings. The night of the gala felt like stepping into the life I'd once imagined for someone else. The city glowed that evening. Not in the harsh, glittering way of ambition, but in the soft pulse of something finally aligning. My car pulled up to the Preston Hotel, that same glass facade that once reflected my disappointment back at me. Now it reflected the lights of photographers waiting at the entrance. My name, or rather, my company's, shone above the doorway on a gold foil banner, Preston Women's Empowerment Gala, presented by Harper & Co. It wasn't just a sponsorship line. It was a full-circle headline. I stepped out slowly, not rushing the moment. The night air was cool against my skin, and every sound, the hum of conversation, the flick of camera shutters, seemed to arrive in slow motion. My dress wasn't expensive for the sake of being expensive. It was simple, elegant, and deliberate. A shade of ivory that caught the light and held it. When I walked through the revolving doors, I caught the faint scent of peonies and champagne. The same scent from 10 years ago when I'd stood outside, waiting for a chance to belong. I remember clutching my volunteer badge back then, hoping no one would notice how my shoes were scuffed. That night, I wasn't allowed inside the main ballroom. I served water to guests who barely looked at me. Now, as the elevator opened to the grand floor, a staff member smiled and said, "Good evening. Ms. Harper, the VIP lounge is ready for you." The words landed softly, but they rewrote something inside me, inside the ballroom. Everything glittered, chandeliers, silverware, laughter. A string quartet played near the stage, and rows of tables stretched beneath a canopy of white lights. My aunt was at the center table, dressed in emerald green, her posture straight, her charm steady. When she saw me, her smile flickered, genuine, then measured. "Lena." "You made it," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "Everyone's been talking about you. You've really outdone yourself." "Thank you," I said, returning her smile. "It's a beautiful event," she nodded a little too quickly. "We couldn't have done it without you." There it was, the smallest confession, tucked inside politeness. As the evening unfolded, speeches began. Women stood one by one, sharing stories of resilience, courage, and second chances. Some of them I had personally helped through my campaigns. I watched them speak, proud but grounded. My aunt, however, kept glancing my way, as though unsure whether to celebrate me or fear the narrative I carried. When my name was announced near the end, "Please welcome our presenting sponsor, Ms. Lena Harper, founder of Harper & Co." The applause felt unreal. I stood slowly, my heart calm, my steps unhurried. On stage, the lights were warm. I looked over the audience and caught her face, my aunt, sitting perfectly still, hands folded on the tablecloth. I spoke quietly, not like someone delivering a victory speech, but like someone telling a secret that had waited too long. 10 years ago, I began. I stood outside this hotel, right over there, holding a badge that said volunteer. I wasn't invited to the main event. I remember watching women walk through these doors, laughing, confident, radiant. I remember thinking I'd never belong in a room like this. A hush rippled through the audience. My aunt's smile had frozen into something delicate. "But here's what I've learned," I continued. "Belonging isn't something someone gives you. It's something you build, one quiet decision at a time. Tonight isn't about me. It's about every woman who was ever told she wasn't invited and still found a way to show up." There was silence for a beat. Then applause, soft at first, then building. Some people even stood. I smiled and stepped back from the microphone. The string quartet began playing again as I walked off the stage. My aunt stood to greet me, her eyes glistening, not with pride, but something harder to name. "You've become quite the speaker," she said, voice trembling between admiration and guilt. "I've had a lot of practice," I said gently. "Mostly learning how to speak when no one listens." Her lips parted, but she said nothing. The silence between us was the truest conversation we'd ever had. Later, when the crowd thinned and the photographers had left, I stepped outside for some air. The night was cold but kind. Across the street, the city lights flickered on the glass windows, the same ones I'd once looked into from the outside. My assistant joined me, holding her phone. "You need to see this," she said, smiling. The post was already trending online. Clips from my speech, the gala's photos, and one headline that made me laugh quietly. "From volunteer to visionary, the woman behind Preston's most powerful night." I didn't repost it. I didn't need to. The proof was already written in the lights around me. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Lena," I turned. My aunt stood by the door, her shawl wrapped tight, her face softer than I'd ever seen it. I wanted to say, "I was wrong," she said quietly. "All those years ago, you deserved better." I nodded, letting the words land without rescuing her from their weight. "I know," I said gently. "But maybe I needed it. Without that door closing, I wouldn't have built my own." She swallowed hard, tears threatening but unshed. "You've done well, truly." I smiled, calm and kind, but with an edge of truth. "We both have. You built a gala. I built a life." Her lips trembled into a faint, regretful smile. "Will you come by for dinner sometime? The family would love to see you." I looked past her, through the glass doors, at the ballroom where my name shimmered above hers on every program. "Maybe," I said softly. "If I'm not working." She nodded, understanding everything that wasn't said. When I finally walked away, the wind carried the faint echo of the music from inside, violins rising, fading. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That night, as my car pulled away from the Preston, I opened the window and breathed in the city air, crisp, free, familiar. My name was still glowing above the hotel entrance, reflected in the glass. I thought about that 21-year-old girl who'd stood outside once, heartbreaking in the cold. I wished I could tell her one thing, that one day she'd walk back through those doors not as a guest, not as a volunteer, but as the reason they opened. The morning after the gala, the world felt almost too still. I woke to sunlight spilling across the white sheets of my apartment, cutting through the curtains in quiet gold streaks. My heels were still by the door, and my gown hung over the chair, carrying the faint scent of roses and champagne. Everything looked soft, calm, and unreal, like the silence that follows a long storm. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to finally face them. To walk into that ballroom, not as the outsider, but as the name on every program, every banner. I thought it would feel like revenge, like a victory so sharp it could pierce through every cold memory. But it didn't. It felt like closure. It felt like air. I made coffee and sat by the window overlooking the city. The streets below were already alive with people rushing, talking, beginning again. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from colleagues, clients, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Your speech was incredible. You're trending. Your aunt must be so proud." That last one made me pause. I thought of her face when I spoke, the way her smile faltered, how her eyes softened just before she looked away. Evelyn wasn't a villain. She was a mirror of what she'd learned mattered. She grew up believing that power was appearance, and I had spent my life proving that it wasn't. In a strange way, we had both been trying to survive the same lesson, just in opposite directions. My phone rang again. Her name for a moment I considered letting it ring out. But something in me wanted to answer, not to reopen anything, but to let it rest. Lena? Her voice was quiet. I didn't want to leave last night without saying thank you. For what? For not embarrassing me, she said softly. You could have told everyone. About that night. About how I turned you away. But you didn't. I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. That wasn't my story to tell. It was yours, silence stretched between us. I heard her take a breath. The kind people take when they're finally ready to say what's been unspoken for years. I was jealous of you, she said, her voice trembling. You remind me of who I wanted to be before I started. Performing. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't even what I thought I wanted. But it was honest, and that made it enough. I understand, I said gently. We all perform, Aunt Evelyn. Some of us just forget to stop. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. You're wiser than I ever was. I didn't agree or disagree. We both knew wisdom isn't something you inherit. It's something you build out of what you've lost. After we hung up, I sat quietly, staring at the skyline. The city was bright now, the kind of brightness that doesn't blind. It just exists. Steady and sure. I opened my laptop to a folder I hadn't touched in years. Harper & Co. Origins. Inside were my first sketches, the old marketing mock-ups I used to design in my studio apartment, the ones I sent to companies that never replied. I scrolled through them slowly, remembering those late nights, the hum of the fridge, the sound of my own typing as the world slept. I realized something then. I didn't build my company to prove Evelyn wrong. I built it to prove me right, to prove that I was capable, even when no one clapped. That I could build beauty even when no one was watching. That I could make a name that stood not above anyone, but on its own. I closed the laptop and looked at my reflection in the window. Not dressed up, no makeup, just me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting to arrive anywhere. That afternoon, I went for a walk through the city. Every building I passed felt like a memory. Coffee shops where I'd worked on proposals, the print shop that gave me my first discount, the old co-working space where I'd pitched my first client. I stopped in front of the hotel once more. The banners had been taken down, replaced by plain glass doors reflecting the street. It almost looked ordinary again. I smiled. Because to me it wasn't ordinary at all. It was sacred ground. The place where I once learned that doors can close and still not end you. As I stood there, a woman approached me, carrying a folder and a nervous smile. Excuse me, she said. You're Lena Harper, right? I wanted to thank you. Your speech last night? It gave me courage. Courage for what? I asked. She took a deep breath. To leave a job that doesn't see me? I smiled. Then you already did the hardest part. She thanked me again and walked away, and I realized in that moment, that was the real return. Not the applause, not the spotlight, not even the headline. It was this, the quiet ripple that happens when one closed door teaches another woman how to build her own. That night, I opened my journal, the same one I'd started at 21, and wrote only one line, they taught me to knock. I learned to build, and for the first time, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt peace. Months passed after the gala, but the echo of that night followed me like soft music in another room, present, but never intrusive. The story had spread beyond social media. Business magazines reached out for interviews. A few even called me the face of modern resilience, which made me laugh. Because behind every polished photo, there was still the girl who once stood outside that glass door, shivering and waiting. Success, I'd learned, doesn't erase the old versions of you. It just gives them somewhere safe to rest. One morning, as I sat in my office surrounded by sunlight and sketches for our next campaign, my assistant Nina knocked gently on the door. You have a visitor, she said with a knowing smile. I looked up. Who? Nina grinned. Someone who insists she's your biggest fan. Evelyn Carter. My heart stilled, but not in fear. Just recognition. When Evelyn walked in, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just softer. Her usual elegance was still there, but this time it wasn't armor. She carried a folder in her hand, and for a moment, she looked almost nervous. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, glancing around my office. "Not at all," I replied. "Have a seat," she smiled faintly. "You've built something beautiful, Lena." "Thank you," I said, watching her settle into the chair across from me. The last time we'd sat together, she'd been the one in power. Now the air between us felt balanced, even forgiving. She opened the folder. "I wanted to show you something." Inside were photos from her new project. Not a gala this time, but a mentorship program. Workshops for young women in small towns, offering scholarships and internships in business and design. "I was inspired after your speech," she said softly. "You made me realize that empowerment isn't about applause. It's about access." Her eyes met mine. "Would you consider partnering with us? As a mentor?" I smiled, and for a brief moment, the years between us melted. "I'd be honored." And I meant it. That's the thing no one tells you about closure. It's not about who apologizes first or who wins. It's about the moment you realize there's no score left to settle. We spent the next hour planning. I promised to fund the first year of the mentorship and open my company for internships. She promised to bring her network, her influence, and her name. It wasn't reconciliation born from guilt. It was collaboration born from growth. When she left, I looked around my office. Walls lined with storyboards, mood boards, and photos of the women my company had helped spotlight. There was so much more to do, and for the first time, I wanted to do it not to prove anyone wrong, but to help others feel right. Over the next year, the Harper Initiative became more than a name. We launched free branding courses for women-owned startups, partnered with local colleges to fund scholarships, and created a design incubator where ideas became businesses. Every time I walked into one of our sessions and saw young women sketching, pitching, creating, I saw parts of myself in them. The overlooked ones, the underestimated ones, the ones who waited too long outside closed doors. One afternoon, during a workshop in a small coastal town, a girl raised her hand and asked, "How do you know when you've made it?" The room fell quiet. I thought about it. The magazine covers, the awards, the applause that once seemed like validation. Then I shook my head softly. You don't make it, you make you. And when you stop needing permission to exist in your own story, that's when you've arrived. They smiled, and I realized it wasn't just a lesson for them. It was one I had spent a lifetime learning. A few weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail, embossed, elegant, familiar. Evelyn's next gala. This time, the invitation didn't just say guest. It said, presented in partnership with the Harper Initiative. I stared at the envelope for a moment, smiling. I didn't need to attend to understand what it meant. I had already been there, and beyond. That evening, instead of putting on a gown, I stayed home. I cooked dinner, played soft jazz, and looked out at the city from my balcony. Lights shimmered in every direction, each one belonging to someone else's story, someone else's climb. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. I was right where I belonged. As I poured myself a glass of wine, I opened my journal to the last page and wrote one final line beneath the others. Some doors close, some open, but the best ones, you build yourself. I smiled at the words, at their quiet truth. Then I closed the journal and let the night settle around me, calm and sure. The applause had ended, but the music, my music, would keep playing. The months after the mentorship launch passed in a steady quiet that felt like a tide coming in. Not dramatic, but patient, reshaping everything it touched. I woke to new emails each morning. Young women asking about internships, a college wanting a guest lecture, a small brand hoping I could help them rethink their image. The work was less glamorous than the gala photos made it look, but it felt truer. It was hours in conference rooms and community centers, listening more than talking, drawing plans on paper placemats, and following up with concrete offers. That kind of work doesn't make headlines. It makes lives. Evelyn kept her promise. She opened old doors and nudged people through them. Photographers, caterers, donors who had been insulated by society circles for years now asked to invest in girls from places their parties once ignored. She did it with a nervous gusto, like someone learning a new language. Sometimes she tripped over the vocabulary of humility. Sometimes she sent me messages at 1 a.m. about a donor who'd balked, asking what to do. I'd text back short, practical replies. Meet them where they are. Show them a glimpse of the work. Make the ask specific and small. She learned slowly how to make power useful. My own life kept expanding sideways. Harper and Koba took on pro bono weekends. The design incubator grew into a 6-month fellowship with a cohort that met every Saturday. Watching those women evolve, the slow face softening when a pitch landed, the way hands stopped trembling over a prototype, that was my favorite kind of applause. At each graduation, I left the stage feeling quieter than when I arrived, because the real joy was watching someone else pick up the pen I'd once needed. The family changed too. Not all at once, not smoothly. There were awkward dinners, where Dad tried to make small talk about the industry and fell silent when I used words like brand, strategy, and user research. My brother called less to criticize and more to ask technical questions about taxes, payroll, things he'd always handed off. Those conversations were clumsy at first, a child learning to say, "I'm sorry," without sounding like he'd been coached. I accepted the new rhythm, small, honest attempts rather than sudden conversion. One afternoon, months into the program's first year, I received a handwritten invitation. It was from Evelyn, a modest card asking me to the Preston Foundation's new pilot, a scholarship evening in a community center out of town, not the hotel ballroom. No gold foil this time, just paper. It read, "Come be my guest. We want to honor the first cohort together." I thought about the woman who'd kept me outside that hotel, the way the door had clicked shut on my 21-year-old hands. I thought about the audiences I had now and the women waiting for a way. I also thought about how much weight an invitation can carry when it comes from the place that once rejected you. I said yes. The night of the pilot, the room smelled like kettle coffee and new books. The chairs were plastic. The stage had a hand-painted banner that said First Steps. The founders of local co-ops and a couple of nervous donors sat under fluorescent lights. The girls, the cohort, filed in wearing shoes that had been repaired and dresses with small handmade hems. They were not polished for cameras. They were real, raw, hopeful. Evelyn stood beside me when it was time to speak. She touched my arm and mouthed, "Thank you." I stepped up and spoke about how sometimes the doors that close are the ones that teach you how to build better ones. I watched their faces as I talked. Not the polite smiles of Gala attendees, but the concentrated, hungry faces of people who needed permission to try and didn't know how to ask for it. After we let them present, one by one they pitched ideas that were practical and brave. A brand of durable raincoats for female field workers, a community bakery that trained young mothers, a mobile tutoring van. They weren't polished, and they didn't have to be. They had heart, and we had resources. At the end of the evening, as we were packing up mismatched chairs, Mom approached me. She had driven in from the suburbs, coat folded over her arm, looking both proud and tentative. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a faded photograph. Me at 11, standing on the front steps in a dress Grandma sewed, clutching a book. On the back was her handwriting. "We're learning too." Her eyes brimmed for a second, and she said quietly, "You made me see something I was afraid of." She didn't ask for a speech or for a dinner. She didn't demand recognition. She simply sat with the awkwardness of being late to understand. That felt like progress. I learned to accept those small gestures without assuming they fixed the years. Coming to terms with the past didn't mean sanitizing it. It meant sitting through the uncomfortable parts and deciding what to keep and what to let go. I kept the fact that they'd been imperfect humans with my needs at times invisible. I let go of the bitterness that once spun my nights into arguments with ghosts. It was a slow unspooling of anger into steady purpose. The program matured. A donor dinner produced a multi-year grant. The incubator launched 2 startups that paid fellowship students living wages. The stories multiplied. One fellow called me from the other side of the city the month she opened her bakery. Her voice on the phone trembled with a pride that had nothing to do with me. I'd only helped her see a path. That day, I realized the deepest revenge is generative. You make space for others to rise so high that their shadows cover old wounds. The public attention softened too. The society columns still mentioned Evelyn's name sometimes, but now they asked for quotes from multiple people. The young women we had supported, the small brand owners we'd scaled. My name remained steady in the middle of it all. Not because I chased it, but because I built systems that increased access. I never once put a banner with my own face over a door for the sake of rubbing a story in. I used banners to hang the names of scholarship recipients. One quiet morning, a journalist asked me for a parting line for the piece she was writing on the first year of the Harper Initiative. I thought about doors and banners and the empty dress I once wore outside a hotel. I thought about how different it felt to place a seat at a table than to stand in its shadow. I told her, I hope the door I build is big enough for everyone who needs to come in. She wrote it down, but the line that became the pull quote was something I hadn't prepared. We don't need permission to belong. I didn't mind. It was true. It belonged to everyone who showed up to the workshops hungry and unashamed. In the end, the table I'd set didn't have a head seat with my name on it. It had many seats, and each one had a story hung above it, not photos of the powerful, but portraits of people who had once been told to wait. Sometimes my aunt sat at that table. Sometimes my mother did. Sometimes my brother would drop by, bringing a pastry from a fellow-run bakery he'd loved. Sometimes none of my family came at all, and that was fine. The work went on. There was one last moment that felt like a small, private epilogue. On the anniversary of the first gala, Evelyn sent an email to our partners. It was short and frank. Thank you to Lena Harper for reminding me that there are better ways to give than to be seen. I read it twice and then, without thinking too hard, I printed it and taped it above my desk. Not as a trophy. More like a map marker of how far we'd wandered and returned. That night, when the studio was quiet and the city hummed below, I sat at my kitchen table and opened a small wooden box from Grandma's things. Inside were a few buttons, a pencil stub worn down to a nub, and a photograph of my family on a summer afternoon. I traced the edge of the photo and wrote one last note in my journal. They said I wasn't invited. I built the place where invitations end. Come if you want. Stay if you'll do the work. I closed the book and walked to my window. The city lights were the same scattered stars I'd seen the night I first left home, but now they felt like neighbors, not judges. I poured a cup of tea and let the warmth settle in my hands, thinking of all the women who had knocked politely and had been told to wait. We taught ourselves to hammer, to paint, to upholster. We made a door wide enough to welcome the ones behind us, and somewhere in the hum of that ordinary, honest life, the best kind of revenge played softly. An ordinary woman living the life she chose and inviting everyone with the courage to join her.